Continuing with the cranial bones, we have the occipital bone, which makes up the skull's posterior wall, but also the inferior portion as well. So we can see on this picture here, we're looking at an inferior view of the skull, and a lot of this bone is occipital bone. Now we're going to name some bone parts from your lab list. Whether this is lecture or lab, you should know some of the major landmarks of each of these bones. The occipital bone, first landmark is the foramen magnum, which is a large opening for the spinal cord. We have occipital condyles, which are smooth, rounded joint surfaces for your most superior vertebrae, C1 or atlas. There is an external occipital protuberance, which is a large attachment points for ligaments. Next, for cranial bones, we have temporal bones. There's one on the left, one on the right. They're found on the lateral aspect of the skull, but also on the inferior aspect of the skull. They have 4 major regions, and we'll see that on the picture on the next slide. But important point is that the temporal bones include a mandibular fossa. A fossa is a basin-like depression in bone, and in this case it's for the mandible, which is your lower jaw. So your lower jaw connects with the temporal bone to form the TMJ joint, which is your temporal mandibular joint. So let's look at that on this picture here. We're talking about this area right there. So on the temporal bone, which you see in purple, there is a mandibular fossa. You can see an external acoustic meatus for your ear canal, a zygomatic process, which stretches toward the zygomatic bone, which is your cheekbone. We have some large processes for tendon attachments. Behind your ear canal, we have a mastoid process, lever for some large neck muscles, a styloid process. And on this inferior view, we can see the mandibular fossa very well, which is the fossa for your lower jaw or your mandible. There are many foramen, which we'll label some in lab. Foramen are holes, which are passageways for nerves and blood vessels. And on this view, we're looking inside the cranial cavity. We see the temporal bone here as well. And there's one important landmark here, which you can see very subtly right there and right there. That's your internal acoustic meatus. That's where one of your cranial nerves leaves your internal ear region to get to the brain. The next bone is the sphenoid bone, and the sphenoid bone you can see here is this bat-shaped bone when we're looking in the cranial cavity. An important part of the sphenoid bone is something called the sella turcica, which is right here. It resembles a saddle, which is what sella means. Turcica means Turkish. Someone thought it looked like a Turkish saddle, but that saddle houses the pituitary gland, which is your master gland in your body, which you'll learn when you get to the endocrine system eventually. One other important part of the sphenoid bone is that it is the keystone bone of the cranium. And what that means is all other cranial bones, there's 8 cranial bones, sphenoid makes 8, so all 7 other cranial bones will articulate, which means forms a joint with the sphenoid bone. That makes it the keystone bone of the cranium. The final bone of the cranial bones is the ethmoid bone. There's some important parts to it. I'll just read through it quickly and then we'll actually see it on a picture. It's the superior part of the nasal septum. I will show you that. The crista galli is an important landmark of the ethmoid bone. it contains the superior and middle nasal concha, not the inferior nasal concha. That's actually a separate bone. We'll see that and explain it on the next slide. And its perpendicular plate forms the superior portion of the nasal septum, not the inferior portion, because that is a different bone called vomer. So a lot of stuff going on here. I can explain that on the next view. In the cranial cavity, we can see the ethmoid bone here, and two good labels are the crista galli, which means rooster crown, which is an attachment for your dura mater of your meninges. And on either side, we see the cribriform plate. These are two good labels, especially for your lab. However, if we look at this view, we can see some of the ethmoid bone through the nasal cavity. This wall that separates the left nostril from the right nostril, which is your nasal septum, well, only the superior portion, the superior half of it, is part of your ethmoid bone, which is the perpendicular plate. The inferior portion is another bone that's called vomer, which we'll see in another video. Then on either side of the nasal cavity, we have these ridges. They're called concha. What they do is when you breathe in, the air will form turbulence around them and will help warm the air because of that movement. But there are three pairs of ridges. You have inferior nasal concha, middle nasal concha, and way up high, which you can't see, you'll have superior nasal concha on each side. Now the ethmoid bone only includes the middle nasal concha and the superior nasal concha, which you can't see. These inferior nasal concha, well, conchae, I should say, plural, are not part of the ethmoid bone. They are, in fact, their own bones. They're independent of any other bone. So, good thing to show you here. I'm going to use a pen. If we take the nasal cavity, I'm going to draw it a little larger here, right, which is this area there. We can sort of draw an imaginary line. So everything superior to that line, dividing it into superior and inferior, everything superior is the ethmoid bone. So that nasal septum, well, the superior portion is the ethmoid bone. That's the perpendicular plate. And then you have nasal concha, inferior, middle, and remember you can't see the superior ones. Well, only the middle and superior nasal concha there and there are part of the ethmoid bone. The inferior nasal concha is its own bone. The inferior portion of the nasal septum is its own bone as well, which we call vomer.